I'm waiting. I'm almost here. So there's something strange happening in the West. For the first time in history, large parts of our American culture is being taught to hate itself. It's being taught that everything in America is shameful, that everything our ancestors built is corrupt, that the nation that they live in is illegitimate. There is actually a word for this phenomenon, and it's called oikophobia. Now, it's not a word, don't worry if you didn't hear it in Latin 30 years ago. It was coined in the 1990s. It means a rejection of one's own home, a distaste for one's own culture. Criticism of a nation is healthy. Every civilization has dark chapters, but something different is happening now. Critique has turned into repudiation. And when a society teaches its children that their own home is evil, something very dangerous begins to happen. We have kind of a cancer. So let's talk about positive critique and negative critique. And let's talk about what we're seeing, because what I see in the classroom setting, if you don't know much about my channel, I focus on making concepts that we don't even necessarily think about, making them relatable to the everyday parent, to the grandparent, to the teacher who's trying to figure out what's going on. So here's criticism. Negative criticism is harmful and insulting. There's no suggestions for improvement. It's vague or non-specific. It feels like a personal attack, creates fatigue and defensiveness. Positive, think about this. Think about a parent with their child. Your child doesn't do something correctly. And so you come to them and you say, hey, you didn't do that correctly. Let me help you get that right. Well, we can act that same way with our country. And what happens a lot of times is today our children are being taught that they should only critique their country. This comes down from elites, but that they should only critique their country. They should never critique another country. They should never have this attitude of maybe some civilizations are indeed better than others. They're not allowed to think that way. So constructive criticism is compassionate and helpful. Suggestions, it offers suggestions for improvement, specific, clear, detailed, actionable goals. And it focuses on the work. Whereas negative criticism feels like a personal attack. It's vague and specific. Why can you never do anything right? That is negative. Whereas specific, clear, I really wish you would pick up your clothes. One thing is positive, one thing is not. When that becomes something that our country thinks about, then we have real problems. So loving our country does not mean pretending that it's perfect. We have real flaws, but it's okay to put those flaws into action. It's okay to ask, are these into perspective? I'm sorry. So it's okay to ask, are these worse than other countries? Are they better than other countries? What could we do in the future? When I'm talking to my students, I often say history is there for us to learn from. We want to repeat the good things, and we want to never repeat the bad things. History can be a warning and it can be an encouragement. But what we're being taught, what the oikophobic mind is being taught, is that there's never anything good to look at. And I will prove to you as we move through this that we are indeed being taught this. So let me just give you an example of how one could teach slavery and teach its horrificness. This is a man who has been whipped. I'm just going to change to a different kind of picture so you can see more of me in it. This is a man who has been whipped. He's obviously a slave. It's a pretty horrific picture. It's a pretty horrific time. But to teach in perspective, to not teach with the intention of making children feel guilty, is to say, while this is horrific and while this did happen in America, has it happened in other countries as well? Is it still happening in some countries? And we do know that the answer to that is true. But a lot of times you're not supposed to have that kind of a discussion. Another thing is the robber barons. This was an interesting topic that we had last year. And the robber barons, of course, greed and gluttony, but also a lot of these people were immigrants. They came over here from other countries where they had nothing, where they slept with their animals to stay warm. And so, as robber barons, some of them decided to create communities, create housing, sometimes medical, sometimes schools, granted, not for very strong education, but was it better than what they had before? Is that why people were willing to do it? And I don't have the answers. I wasn't there in that time, but I think that it's worth having our kids be presented with both sides of the conversation. The same thing with child labor. Child labor was horrible. Many children lost their legs and arms and, their limbs. And it was a very bad time. But the fact that these kids were able to work, did it help their family? Is there any other perspective than America is just evil? Because when we teach America is just evil, we are force feeding a narrative to our children that has no hope and has no joy. And that's intentional. Elites promoted cultural self-hatred, and they continue to do it. Just recently at Jesse Jackson's funeral, the former president stood up and said how bad America was, how ashamed they were of this country. And it was offensive enough that even his son said, "You don't even know my father." So always using that narrative, always using that poison, that there's nothing good here attitude, makes our kids sick. And the irony is that the people who promote this oftentimes don't have this kind of education for their children. Oftentimes for their kids, they are being taught a totally different education system. They're being taught to read good books. They're being taught to do classical math. They have a classical education, oftentimes a Montessori education, whereas our kids are getting pumped through with their Chromebooks with very negative narratives. And I have seen this. I have seen this from, I want to say TED Ed, but that's not what I'm thinking of. Crash Course is a very good example of giving a negative view, a progressive view of history. Now, the thing is that a lot of parents, when they hear the term progressive, they think, well, we all want progress. I definitely was that person. What's wrong with progress? Well, progress is a problem when it comes to the point of progress at any cost. So if it comes down to this point of we've got to crack some eggs to make an omelet, and if the eggs happen to be people that you don't agree with, then we have real problems. And what oftentimes happens in education is that they teach these kids, again, I will bring you receipts, I have them in these slides, but they teach these kids that there's only one kind of acceptable, and that one kind of acceptable needs to be, quite frankly, a globalist, which is who Klaus Schwab is. Klaus Schwab was the head of the World Economic Forum. Now, a lot of people think, ooh, that's conspiracy or whatever, but it's not. And in the last year, Randy Weingarten of the Teachers Association said that they will be partnering with the World Economic Forum in education, in curriculum. Again, I will show you what that looks like. So what happens is that the elite children are not given the same education. They're not intentionally fed something that makes them depressed. When I say cancer, I mean it. I mean, we're intentionally making our kids sick. There's a lot of people, I'm trying to think of the mental condition when you intentionally poison your children to make yourself feel good. If anybody can remember that, please put it in the comments. But that's what we're doing. So a lot of times the elite will go off to a university where they'll be taught that their ideas are enlightened. These are the greatest ideas ever. Where oikophobia comes from is that the man who created it, he was in France with a bunch of the most elite people, and they were at the, I want to say the Savoy, but they started writing, kind of like Eat the Rich type stuff on the walls. And these are people who were already affluent themselves, but they were taught to hate themselves, but in a way that was virtue signaling, in a way that said, oh, aren't I so good for being this person? But at the same time, not really giving up what they have, which tends to be what happens when the elite feel that that education that they are giving your child, or that they are imposing on you, maybe through your workplace, saying you now have to adopt these ideas because this is what a good person would do. And those ideas tend to be to hate capitalism, which is usually how the elite become the elite. The thing is they still prosper. And when the chaos erupts, it's not the elite neighborhoods that get attacked or that burn. It's small businesses, it's family stores, it's local communities. And the cost of performative rebellion is paid for by ordinary people. So as our kids become soldiers for this, and again, I will show you, as our kids become soldiers for this, more and more their hopelessness exasperates. All right. So here's just an example of virtue signaling. Our kids get it everywhere. They get it from media. They get it from celebrities standing and saying, oh, let them in, but not to our communities. Remember, illegals were not welcome in Martha's Vineyard, right? So, but this is what our kids get told. They get this constant message of the morally superior adopt these ideas. So performative rebellion, much of what we see today is performative rebellion. Students are encouraged to believe that they are overthrowing oppressive systems, but the people who are funding their belief in that are the people who they would call the oppressive. They are the millionaires. They are the billionaires. And they're the people that are teaching our children that they're oppressed and that they should have no hope. Well, when you do that, you keep the kids in kind of a place of mental slavery. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. That mental slavery was first practiced on the African Americans. Tell them that they are incapable enough. Tell them that they can't. Tell them that the odds are stacked against them so much that they'll start to believe it. And then it'll be like a religion. It's so ingrained inside of them. Many institutions encouraging this rebellion are the same ones that hold enormous power. Take, for example, much of our education is funded by the Gates Foundation and from Zuckerberg Chan. All right, let me show you some proof of how our kids are being taught to be activists, how they're being taught to destroy the West. Now, liberated education or liberated ethnic studies is the foundation of education. That's what's coming down the pipeline. Maybe your school doesn't have it yet. Yesterday or a couple of days ago, I heard from somebody who said, I'm in Minneapolis and none of this stuff is here. Well, lady, I hope you're watching, or I hope you'll watch in the replay, but this stuff is here. So liberated ethnic studies, peel back the label and expose the ideology. Let's go and look at what's really inside. This is how schools and cultural institutions shape our children's minds. You need to consider what's happening to the curriculum. So many people do not want to believe this, but this is K-12 curriculum. Mostly in high school. So here's some of the evidence from that liberated ethnic studies. That's from defendinged.com, defendingeducation.com. So K-12 school districts have spent $17,520,788 on ethnic studies professional development. That's where teachers go and get trained on this stuff. Curriculums, textbooks, and programming. Gibbs Smith Education, right here in Utah, created something called an ethnic studies survey, and I'm going to show you some of the pictures from that. This ethnic studies survey, now you need to think, because as parents, as grandparents, you think ethnic studies and you think, let's celebrate culture. What's wrong with that? Nothing. Nothing is wrong with celebrating culture, but learning that your culture, especially as a white person, is somehow bad, or as an American or somebody who values Western ideals is bad. That is a problem that we're paying for with our tax dollars. So somehow in that idea of learning just about cultures, we are studying anti-racism, climate justice, activism in school. And I have access to this entire curriculum book. It's online. If you want it, I can send it to you in the comments. But by the end of the book, it asks the kids what they're going to do to continue their activism. And every single group in this book talks about, so it'll start first by talking about racial identity in general and how it's a social construct. And then it'll talk about, say, the Jewish people. And it gives a very small thing about the Jewish people because it can only teach through a progressive lens. The same thing with African Americans. In this book, it says Martin Luther King doesn't go far enough because he doesn't get violent. Booker T. Washington is mocked in the book because they want violence, they want activism, they want revolution. And how do you get revolution? Well, you've got to teach the kids there's nothing good, and so they should tear it all down. So the next page of the book looks like this. This up here is an utter lie. And it compares, this is a situation in Virginia where the parents got upset because a person, I wonder if I can get a bigger picture for you here. I think so. Okay, so this picture here, they're upset because this is when the trans-identified male student attacked a girl, sexually assaulted a girl in the bathroom. And the parents lost their minds. They were very, very upset. But when you read this caption here, it says, not unlike when parents didn't want to integrate during segregation. So the kids are told very clearly that if you don't support boys and girls bathrooms, that it is the same thing as segregation. Once again, what's, the big, huge flaw? Because you're not thinking correctly. So the next part is defining whiteness. And in that one, they measure a nose, which is something they did. I mean, this is a true photo, right? But they measured a nose. Now, I work with a bunch of young people, middle school and high schoolers. And if they saw this nose video, they may sit and go, well, they may start to look at each other's noses. And that may turn some people, they may feel insecure about the fact that their nose is wider. And I'm saying that as a person of color, right? If I was sitting in a classroom and suddenly there was a let's evaluate each other's noses, I might feel very uncomfortable, especially if I lived in a place where I was not the predominant race. But again, there's no joy in this curriculum, none. So here are the leaders of this particular book. You've got Robin DiAngelo. You also have Ta-Nehisi Coates and, oh gosh, the man who wrote Not White Fragility, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram X. Kendi, all known for being frauds at this point. But these are the voices. Again, this curriculum is called Voices. These are the voices that are celebrated. Mind you, this is a book for 11th and 12th graders. Whites consistently choose and enjoy racial segregation. Really? Really? Has that been your experience? Because it just really hasn't been mine. Whites consistently choose and enjoy racial segregation, living, working, and playing only together. In my experience, white people have been the most likely to say, hey, come on over. Hey, enjoy. Hey, let's all sit together. When I go to parks, the people who self-segregate tend to be minorities. But this narrative is told to our kids. Feel bad about yourself. Feel bad about those people. They really don't want you. They inherently don't want you around them. But that's not the truth. That is maybe her truth, but it's not the truth for most people. And the thing is we must be in love with the truth. Because if you're not in love with the truth, you will suck up all of this poison. So every single person in this book, every mentor in this book, person by person by person, is a person who is a progressive, anti-racist, which really means racist, who pushes one particular progressive ideology. The goal is to get your kids to hate the West so that they will adopt globalism. That's the goal. That's what's happening in schools. And if your school hasn't hit it yet, then you're very, very lucky. But I'm showing you a curriculum book. This is not some pulled up paper off of the internet. This is literally a curriculum book. It is called Voices in Ethnic Studies Survey. I'm going to show you another one. This one shows you the course objectives of this program. Again, I'll have to put it in the show notes, but this says course objectives include a focus on formation of individual and collective identities. Your in-group. Your in-group. Investigating resource distribution and environmental impact. And analyzing systems of power and inequality. Well, you better feel bad about yourself, because if you don't feel bad about yourself, you might not pass the class. Systems of power and inequality, including economic, political, environmental, and social. That's the focus here. Students will meet the following goals. Students will meet the following goals in this course. Identify the factors that contribute to the formation of individual and collective identities. Break apart. Divided we fall, my friends. And that is the goal. So this cancer, as it spreads, I'm just going to check over here. It looks like might have some notes. I do have some notes. Munchausen, thank you. Yes. Munchausen syndrome is when somebody intentionally makes their kids sick so that they can feel good about themselves. We had what has been coined Transhausen syndrome. But I would say that the teachers who adopt this, the activist teachers who adopt this, they're intentionally making your kids sick so that they can say, I'm so enlightened. And I've actually heard people say this, I have watered the ground and made it fertile where the parents, those rural parents, left it dry. So they feed it with their ideas, their cosmopolitan ideas. And there's nothing wrong. I think I need to clarify that. There's nothing wrong with appreciating other cultures. The other day in class, I was having my kids do one of those things where you act out a picture. I can't think of what it's called. I want to say a mural, not a mural. Anybody has the word? That would be great. I'm hearing devouring mother. Yes, very much so. The devouring mother is a concept of a mother who must take over, and oftentimes not only just take over their own children, but take over other children. They need that status of I am the all-powerful, most magnificent mother. And then they teach the poison to the kids, and it makes them sick. We wonder why we have a suicide pandemic. Well, we're making our children sick by robbing them of joy and shoving this down their throats, shoving someone's opinion down their throat and calling it a fact. That's what we're doing to these guys. So here's just Newzilla. I've got to open this one a little bit bigger and see if I can see it any better. What is identity? Systems of power. Defining your community. And again, this all comes down to their ideas of what community is. Not charades. I appreciate it. It's a tableau. That's the word. So I had the kids look at fine art and then create a tableau of it, of what we were talking about in history. So they posed, and it was actually, some of them were quite good. Some of them were quite hilarious. And I probably will laugh for another, 2 weeks or so. I don't want to show you empty pictures. So let me move on here. That's odd. Okay. Let me get out of notes for a moment. Get into notes for a moment. So here's the thing. We constantly say, we're so worried about our children's mental health. And because we're so worried about our children's mental health, we put more of this into the schools. See, it's this big umbrella. The umbrella would be the umbrella of DEI. And so we have this, let me get a better, not that when it's an empty photo. So we have this big old picture of an umbrella, and we've got social and emotional learning that helps our kids supposedly when they're depressed. But again, it is the exact same thing. It is still teaching them about their communities, teaching them not just about like their community in the way we would think of their community, but what collective do they belong into? Teaching them that gender is not really a thing, and they're just supposed to accept that. And if they don't accept that, they don't have the right competencies. Teaching especially the white male to hate themselves, but it's not just the white male. When I ran for office, I had an assistant. My assistant was from Brazil. And the person that I was running against, his wife is a teacher. And she came up to my assistant and said, what a pity it is that you have Americanized. So when people are coming here, which we have this massive influx, when people are coming here, they are told immediately, kids are told, do not assimilate. There's nothing good about America. Why would you? That's what our kids are being taught as they're coming here to be quote unquote new Americans. They're taught there's nothing good. Keep your homeland. Now, there's nothing wrong with loving where you've come from. Nothing. But if you're taught that that love must outweigh the place that's opening up its arms and giving you so much opportunity, there is something very wrong with that. And again, it comes down to divided we fall. So I have more info here and I'm not seeing it. Okay. So one of the things that happens both with people who've come here from other countries, but also especially with African Americans, is it's called like Pan-Africanism. This is when you have decided to romanticize and love. This is annoying. Well, that's not good. Let's see. Nope. All right, whatever. This is when you have decided to romanticize and love what's not true. I've interviewed people from Africa, and when I talk to them, oh goodness, okay. When I talk to these people, they openly say African Americans would not be welcome there. We hate people who live on this side of the river from us. And now you want to bring in Americans who, honestly, we don't have a lot of respect for. A lot of Africans really clarify we are African, not African American. That's a fact. But our children are taught, oh, if only I lived in my homeland. If only I was Wakanda forever. Wow, it would be so amazing. I wouldn't ever be oppressed like I am living under the white man. And it's not true. It's not true. They aren't taught about wars. They aren't taught about genital mutilation. They're just taught, if everybody looked like me, the world would be a much better place. Western civilization is treated as uniquely corrupt, as if it is the worst place ever, as if the Ottoman Empire didn't have horrendous treatment in the way that they treated their slaves, as if they didn't go around and collect little boys and them. But America's chattel slavery is the biggest stain. And because of that, nothing good can be acknowledged. That is what our children are learning. So social media makes it worse because our kids learn via TikTok, right? So you have some socialist who isn't really, who's a champagne socialist, or who's a socialist for clicks, and they tell your kids, oh, all it is about being fair. And I don't know if these people don't know about cultural revolutions and how children turn in and have their own families killed, or if they just find that inconvenient to tell them in, that 40-second clip that's going to go viral. There's also something called digital media literacy. Digital media literacy steers the kids in one direction, and it's taught twice when they're in school. It's taught when they're in middle school, and it's taught when they're in high school. Digital media literacy has this graph, and the graph will say, these guys are okay, these guys are appropriate, stay away from these guys. And I promise you, the stay away from these guys are always conservative voices. Always. Digital media literacy, what has been said is that it started after Hillary Clinton lost her race. Again, I mean, I just look at her face and I think that is the definition of bitterness. And why would we want our kids to be that sick? Why would we want them to be that bitter? I'm going to go back and check. Oh, I don't have any chats. Feel free to ask any questions while I'm scrolling here. So here's some of the scary stuff, as if the rest of this hasn't been scary, but when a culture is taught to hate itself, it won't survive. The first signs of oikophobia were literally happening in the Greek and Roman times. So you start to fantasize about something else being better, about, I mean, it always has to happen when it always happens to a culture who is thriving, to a culture that is financially very secure. When a culture is like that, basically, when you have no problems, you make them. So the people who tend to hate the West tend to be that elite class of people, and specifically that elite class of people's children. So, and they, quite frankly, tend to go into academia. So this culture that hates itself will destroy itself. It has always done that. There are a couple of videos on YouTube that do a really good job of explaining oikophobia. One is a full channel. I'll put him in the notes. Let me see. Is that the one I wanted? No. All right. So that is some heavy stuff, right? The idea that our kids are literally being taught, again, liberated. And when you think of liberated, you need to think liberated from what? And quite frankly, when they say liberated, they mean liberated from the West. And when you break down what liberated from the West is, ultimately, it's liberated from a belief in a Christian God, specifically a Christian God. Why do they need to be liberated from a Christian God? Because a Christian God, Christians believe in that singular relationship, that their rights come from God. So if you can kill God, or even the idea of God, the concept that your rights are inherently yours, if you can destroy that, then you can make people allegiant to the state. The state becomes God. So that's what they're looking at when they say liberated. And so if we can kill Western civilization, then those people who want to be in charge, they win. But they don't have to win. So as I was listening to these long interviews, I want to say the guy's name is Scruton, but I'm afraid that I'll have that wrong. But I think it's Scruton. As I was listening to these videos, one of the things they said, the strongest ways, regardless of whether or not you are a person of faith, you should go to church because it builds community and it builds pride in your community. But more than that, I think that the way to begin to heal, the way to help our kids, and the reason I'm going to say I think this is because I've got students who suffer from this. I've got students who say, I hate white people, and they're white. And the way that you fix it is, first, don't shy away from the conversations. Sit with them and say, why? Really? There's nobody. So you're just going to blanket, and you can always turn it and say, oh, so what's so good about these people? Oh, but aren't you then making a caricature of them? If you say, oh, well, all Black people are funny, you're making a caricature of them. Are they not allowed to be different and individual? And once they agree that that group's allowed to be different and individual, then you can say, so can't white people be? Can't there be good people and bad people and truly evil people of any color? Are ethics and ethnicity, are they separate? So don't be afraid of those conversations. 2, introduce art back into their lives. Whether that's going out into nature and like literally touching grass, or whether that's going back and putting just a single traditional painting in your home. Just bring back something that gets them off of the screen and back into the reality and the beauty of what we have. I think the other thing is to serve, because all of this, like I said, I had this lady the other day and she was like, "You are so dumb. You don't know anything." And I just thought, well, here's what I do know. And the reason why was because she wanted me to give her like a lecture, a dissertation of all of the postmodernists that I've read. And the reality is that I listen to professors. That's what I do. I don't sit and read all of these books because it's not how I want to spend my time. To me, it's far more important to spend my time trying to empower parents and trying to protect the next generation. That's my focus. So I lost my train of thought there. But the thing is that you can have I completely lost my thought. I'm going to go back and look at notes for a moment. Charades. Harmeet Dillon needs to know about all of this. Yes, I know. Yes, comparing it to the fall of Rome. I make paintings and I give them to neighbors. I love that. So yes, getting back into the arts, but really getting back into relationships with your family. And I remember what it is. It's grievance. I don't want to spend my time with people who are justifying a culture of grievance, a mindset of grievance. That doesn't seem worth it to me, and it seems like it makes people sick. I know it makes our kids sick. So I watch in just being willing to have conversations and go that little step further when I'm talking to students. I watch some of that, oh, the world is such an awful place, start to melt away. Just in being able to have conversations and being able to say, why? Why? Back to a 2-year-old, right? Why? Why? So the reason I said to go out and serve is because it gives you a sense of gratitude. If you're serving people who have less than you, it makes you appreciate and put into perspective what you have. And America is something worth celebrating. Not because I'm some perfect Pollyanna, but because in the little bit of time I've traveled, I look like a lot of different cultures, especially if I keep my mouth shut. So I've gone to places where I'm a tourist, just like everybody else, but I meander. And one place that I meandered to, I looked like the natives and I got treated like the natives, and it was not fun. And it wasn't until my significant other at the time came and put his arm around me and brought me into the restaurant that they flipped a switch and started treating me decently. And so when people say that America is probably one of the least racist places, I believe that because I've experienced it just a little bit. But I've also spoken to so many people, and there are many interviews on this channel of people. Sorry, the kind of camera layout, I'm still figuring all of that out, but the content is strong. The people are golden. They lay out their stories And their stories are ones that need to be amplified. I learned about what went on in China by interviewing a woman named Kiri Walder, and she's in my list. And this poor woman, she was a teenager when Mao came into power. And she was in one of those schools where they did horrific things to their teachers. And horrific things were done to her because she was upper middle class and her father worked for the previous government. And when you put that into perspective, and then you put that they come here and they have all of this hope and so much love for this country. Go to one of my more recent interviews with Val, the young man who's only 18 years old, barely, and listen to him talk about how much he loves America because he's safe here. But our children are outside protesting and saying America is the worst place and, you know, death to the people who would protect us. That's where we at. That's where we are at. That is what oikophobia does. So again, it's not this one of the things that CNN has recently decided to talk about, nationalism, or specifically Christian nationalism. It is not loving your country so much that you just believe everybody else is a bunch of dirt. That's not what it is. But it's not having a hate that becomes suicidal either. And that's where we're at. We're at a place where people are saying, give it to everyone else. Who cares? Burn it all down. We are there partially, well, in great part, because of education. People will wonder, well, where in the world did BLM go? They're not out in the streets as much as they were. No, they're in the classroom. They brought their ideas into our classrooms. We started with the 1619 Project. Again, that America was solely built on the ideas of slavery and capitalism. So we start there, and it's only a negative view. And as I was reading the ethnic studies, where I was reading the California model policy before ethnic studies came into play. And in it, it said, teach them the progressive viewpoint. And if there's any time left over, then allow them to hear a different point of view. But only if. Only if. So it's supposed to be minimized. So the people that I respect, oh, there goes my dog. The people that I respect, like Thomas Sowell, we're not supposed to hear from him. He's supposed to just be silenced, right? Ben Carson, same thing. Always supposed to be silenced because, as the progressives put it, Black faces are not necessarily Black voices. Who's teaching your kids to be racist? The people who adopt those kind of ideas. We can criticize, absolutely, and we should, because good parents criticize their kids. They do. They don't make them feel horrible, ideally, but they criticize them so that they'll be better. And we should be better. We should be so better, so much better, that we don't allow really stupid ideas, which we continuously do right now. Oh, all tolerance is good all the time. No, it's not. You've got people saying that pedos is just a gender. That's not a good idea. Oh, we should return to segregation. Just make sure that it's the white people that feel bad and the minorities, not to mention that the minorities tend to hate each other. They may be all this collective right now, but pretty soon they're going to be right back into I'm better. Prioritize me, prioritize me, prioritize me. That's what happens over and over again as we get into this place where we're just like, I hate everyone, right? So you hate everyone, and then they're like, yeah, me too, and me too, and they all pile in together. But the reality is that everybody's going to put their own interests first. So we used to be this country where our own interest was this red, white, and blue hanging in the thing, hanging in the wind. And we used to be this country that understood that the greatness of America came from grace, grit, and resilience. That is what our founding was. It didn't matter if you're on the right or the left. People got grace, which is more than they deserved. Grit means that you overcome and that you're proud of it. And we stopped being proud of it. We changed what resilience means. Resilience means you swallow your poison without complaining. And of course, that's going to make the people who have to sit and listen to that feel bad, resent, hate. And when that comes to your country, when that comes to your home, that's where we are. So we fix it, once again, by purposely infusing education with joy. Not black girl joy, but actual joy. We look to the classics. We read the stories that have inspired multiple generations. Trust me, kids still love Huck Finn. They still love The Secret Garden. You take them outside. You listen to them. You let them know that they matter. You show them the highlights of the good, and you discuss with them as much as they can handle of the bad, but you put it into perspective. Klaus Schwab, he's this guy that I showed you at the beginning. He actually said, it's time to prepare for an angrier world. And I know that's a horrible accent, but that's what I've got for you. So he said, it's time to prepare for an angrier world. They designed this. They literally designed a way to divide us. And it started with, ooh, that person's dirty and disgusting because they won't do X. Oh, let's normalize saying that person's dirty and disgusting because they won't do X. Let's make it not only normal, but good. Let's make it virtuous to say that person is dirty and disgusting because they won't do X. And so some people agreed with that first thing. They said, sounds good to me. That is a really awful thing. And then that awful thing became something that wasn't awful yesterday. But a group of Klaus Schwab type people have decided it's awful today. So now it's a new group of awful. And you can't keep up with it. So you have to focus on joy. Joy is the antidote to oikophobia. In fact, there's another name, and that's called oikophilia, and that means the love of your own country. One of the things I found interesting was that that person who wrote this thing, and I think it's called Contentment of Your Own Country. Again, I'll put it in the thing, but his name is Benedict, and he's an immigrant. And he wrote, just like Konstantin Kisin, a love letter to the West, because they know what we all seem to take for granted. Now, I think I'll finish with this. Again, it tends to be the elite that are pushing this, they truly do believe they're better than everybody else. They think that by telling you that you're stupid, that you aren't as educated as them or whatever else, that you're less of a human. You don't have to give that up to them. In fact, you shouldn't. I think that a farmer outside who can produce massive amount of crops is more valuable than a person who can quote Ibram X. Kendi. It's part of being demoralized. So while they kind of bash you down and say you aren't good enough, you can't do, and you start to believe it, then you're okay with your kids believing it. And we can't be. In my classroom, I tell my kids every single week, you're all geniuses. Yes, we know better than you is the attitude. Absolutely. But in my classroom, I tell my kids every single week that you are all geniuses. And we just have to find your kind of genius. And when we do, I get so excited and I just, I overdo it because they're middle schoolers and elementary and, well, every grade actually. So but every time I get excited for them, they light up. They feel the joy. And that, I promise you, is the antidote to all of this crazy. It doesn't have to be there, but you do have to know that it is there. You do have to know when somebody says this isn't here, they're making it all up, that you can go to Defending Ed and you can pull it up and you can send it right to them. You can pull up Voices and Ethnic Studies survey and send it right to them and say, hey, are you okay with this? Are you okay with this? Do you think that's healthy for our kids? Because it is there. The evidence is there. And the only people who don't know have their heads stuck in the sand. So I appreciate you guys staying here and watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you next time.